Howdy, y'all.
Hello.
Okay, Larry, sell everything to the association.
That's from Bill?
Yep.
Okay. Copy that.
Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Howdy.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock, so we'll begin the meeting. My name is Bill Malinin. I am the General Manager for Bear Valley CSD. Today we are holding the third outreach presentation, which is an opportunity for us to share information about the solid waste rate study that was presented to the board at their last meeting, to solicit input, questions, and most importantly, if you find something wrong with the study, please bring it to our attention so that we can correct it. The intent is to present to the board the report at their June 10th meeting. If there are any changes to it, hopefully then we'll have made those and present it to them for their consideration to finalize and proceed with the 218 rate process, which involves mailings and notifications and an opportunity for property owners to object to the study. And if that happens with a 50% plus one, then the board can't proceed with the rates as proposed. Today we have, if you can see them all, Hamid Jones, who's our Administrative Services Director. We have Don Smith, our Administrative Specialist in Public Works. Larry Wiggins, who is the General Services Supervisor overseeing transfer station and solid waste. Krista McEwen, who's the Assistant to the General Manager and Secretary for the board, and Megan Clark, who is our Communications Specialist. So we're all here so that any questions that you may have, hopefully we can answer today. If we can't, we'll find answers. We do, as we have for our water rate adjustment and our sewer rate adjustment, we develop frequently asked questions as a tool to help inform people of what the answer to that question is, with the truth, the information. So if we don't have it today, we'll look to answer it, and then could be that we'll use the FAQs. So with that, we have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll lead us through that. And hopefully it is somewhat self-explanatory, but nonetheless, save your questions, please, till the end. I believe everybody on here that I can tell is familiar with the using of Zoom. There's a virtual raised hand that you can put up, letting us know you wish to talk, and then Christy can go through and let folks in whatever order they've asked to be recognized, and we'll address whatever questions, comments you have at that time. So before I begin, is there any question at this point? All right, seeing none, then I will prepare my outreach. And we'll go from here. So this is the solid waste rate adjustment study presentation. At their last meeting, the board asked that we do this outreach so that we might discuss and review what the goals were, what the results are, what the recommendations are, get any input from the public that we can prior to the board setting the public hearing. Currently, the schedule anticipates that meeting at the end of July 29th, I believe, which allows us to turn this around with the 45-day required notice. So real quick background, our transfer station facility, I know some people call it the dump, etc., but it's a transfer station. It's where the district, on behalf of our residents, collects the household waste as well as green waste and manure, and then hauls it to the landfill, which is outside of Tehachapi, about 18 miles away. The district first created the below ground facility as we know it today back in 1983. It was a limited volume transfer station with a maximum capacity of 15 tons. We were and have been averaging more than that, but initially back in those days, 12.5 tons. One of the things we did as we were conducting the study was to try to assess the potential change in residency. So obviously everybody knows Bear Valley Springs was a second home community, and that over time, I think folks have recognized, and certainly we are aware of people who have owned a home here for many years, but finally retired and settled here permanently. So we took a look at that, and by our utility billing on our water system, we estimate that about 400 accounts have transitioned to full-time from some seasonal or part-time residents since 2014, which is as far back as that utility billing system can go. On average, we've had 7 new homes constructed in that time frame. One of the things that drives this rate adjustment need is the expenses associated with hauling it off. So historically, we had Ben's Sanitation. They were our vendor, if you will. We paid them to haul the bins to the landfill. They were purchased by Waste Management back prior to 2019, but not all of the Ben's assets were acquired by Waste Management until 2019, and that's when they acquired the function of serving Bear Valley Springs. So over time, this chart hopefully gives us an idea that we've had the number of bins hauled going up, and we pay on a per bin basis. And our expenses have gone up related to hauling as well. Tonnage has fluctuated a little bit, but he reached a high of 11,600 tons a couple of years ago. And over the last couple of years here, we've been doing some things to monitor and help reduce some of those tonnages. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So one of the things that we have is a permit through the state of California. Kern County Environmental Health Department is the local enforcement agency. They call them an LEA. One of the things they do is make sure on behalf of the state at the local level that we are adhering to our permit. So one of the things that we recognized here over the last few years, probably the last 5 years, is we were exceeding our tonnage on a regular basis. And so in June of 2017, we were notified that we needed to either comply through reduced tonnage or a change to our permit, or we could face fines of up to $5,000 a day. So in 2017, the permit was updated and improved to a medium volume transfer station, giving us an upper limit of 99 tons per day. Another permit revision, and this was contemplated back in 2017 and 18 and so on, was the change of the facility, particularly with fencing and security. We also looked to improve the traffic flow when we did this, but the upshot was to help control the facility and what was going into it, because there was a number of violations that we were informed about. Again, people were having access 24/7, and we would come in the mornings and find things that shouldn't have been put in there. And sometimes we didn't see them, but they found them at the landfill, and then they would have us come in and pick them up and dispose of them separately. So, and fine us. So the new reconfiguration required a new permit. So we changed the hours of operation. As people now know, it is 5 days per week, 12 hours per day. We enlarged the footprint a little bit, going to the north. We picked up some area and flattened it out. We envision that that will be an area where we can do some further diversion from the landfill. So at some point with waste management, we hope to be able to improve on recycling and to provide a greater service for the residents. As an example, if you had mattresses, maybe there'll be a mattress pickup. There could be what's called white goods, which are appliances, or e-waste, which is anything that you plug in, electronic, and that there may be a way for us to use that space in the future. The increased monitoring, we were told that we had to now have some required staffing. We also looked to reestablish the camera monitoring because it had been essentially defunct for some years. I don't know all of the background of that, but we looked to upgrade it and then to use that to help control the dumping and make sure it is appropriate. So here's an example, and there's actually a letter to myself back in 2018 talking about items that had been found, 30 pounds of hazardous waste, flammable liquids, fluorescent light bulbs, etc. So we were having these kinds of propane tanks and this kind of household hazardous waste, and this is an e-waste that was being dumped into our bin. And hopefully people have been better informed since we've had Megan Clark and the opportunity to do some increased communication with the community about what is and is not acceptable. But that's part of our history and part of what we're looking to correct and improve on. So what it says is when we get these things, we have to take them out, which takes us time. Then we have to, in this case, accumulate or otherwise dispose of these things, which again takes us time. Sometimes if it's household hazardous waste or other things like that, they tell us to get rid of it somewhere else. This is an example of that, where treated wood now has greater restrictions on where you can take it. We are not supposed to be taking it. And this is where we find, that's an example of it in the green waste site. Someone puts things there. We end up having to take care of it on behalf of the CSD. And all of us then are paying for correcting those illegal dumpings. There's a couple other pictures, but more importantly, the listing of items that our staff has personally seen and or had to deal with. These pallets or deck, here's somebody's entire deck got disposed of at our green waste site. Here's somebody's, there's a carpet, there's a microwave oven, both of which somebody's doing their work. And rather than taking it to the landfill themselves, which they would get accepted without charge, they put it in our dumpster and then we have to deal with it. Mattresses, all these furnishings, gym sets, washers and dryers, vacuum cleaners. Then we go over here. All of these items are prohibited items in our permit. We're not supposed to be taking these things, doors and appliances, water heaters, railroad ties. This is serious over here, household hazardous waste. These kinds of items are supposed to be separated out and disposed of. And the landfill, as we know, I hope everybody knows, on the first Saturday of the month has a household hazardous waste collection where you can bring these things for free and they'll take them. And then there's the other motorcycles, go-karts, pianos, jacuzzis, and this first one, of course, just blows me away. But we have folks in the community who would get rid of things like that. Why limited hours? Well, because people were putting their tires and their mattresses and their Barca loungers and tire whatever when we weren't there during our normal work hours. And then again, we've got to deal with it. Here's some more examples. Here's somebody's roofing project that ended up in the green waste pile. Here's a jacuzzi. So the one that we didn't include now, but I'll just share it with you, was a Volkswagen Beetle. So somebody had stripped one down and it fit, and they were able to put it into a dumpster. So, all right, the goals that we had, there's just slightly different than the water and the sewer goals in that we didn't have any debt service to deal with, but adequately fund operations, provide for normal capital, meet our 20% reserve fund balance requirement, and then of course do our best to try to keep the rate as low as possible moving forward. The issues for these are the funding has been in a deficit for the last few years, and so we want to overcome that. There has not been any capital investments in the operations until this most recent reconfiguration. So there's been no site improvements. There's been no equipment replacement, and we'll show you the details on that. And then by the 5th year in our modeling for this, we do meet that reserve fund balance requirement. Here's just a graphic illustration of our revenues are flat, basically about $550,000 per year. And here we go up into 2017 and beyond, where our expenses are exceeding, and this is operating expenses, not including any capital. This may look familiar to some of you in terms of the model that we use, and we've again used the same model with some of the same assumptions regarding indexing and things. But here we are looking backwards, and you'll see one of the significant areas is in salaries and benefits, and then as well operational costs, to the point where we begin in 18 and it continues to exceed, our costs exceed our revenues. This is just an illustration that, without indexing, just with a rate alone, we should be generating about $700,000 based on just the minimum CPI adjustment. Another graphic showing our expenses to our revenues, or our budget to our actual, on expenses. So we have been consistently budgeting up here in the higher areas since back in, well, here we go, 600,000 certainly exceeds our 550. So as far back as 14, 15, again, these rates have not been adjusted since 2007. And even as far back as that, we were budgeting higher. We weren't spending it all, but I think the anticipation of some of the changes were envisioned even then. So that was total expenses. This one is services and supplies. Again, you'll see the spiking going on here, in this case, 15, 16. And here's an explanation. So two things have occurred most recently. One is the direction of having to have employees on premise at all time. So our permit had said 1 to 3, our permit request. The county came back, said you got to have 2, and we have had. We believe we can do with a little less. We're improving the monitoring system and the cameras for some enforcement. But nonetheless, this is one of the contributing factors in the higher than historical personnel costs. But here's another one, which actually is pretty significant if you look at it. Back in 14, 15, where we were exceeding, let me go back here, where we were starting to exceed, and you'll see these going up. During these years, one of the issues and one of the contributing factors now is that these 4 positions that contribute to the overhead or costs of the operations were vacant. And since 2018, we've been filling positions, and then the communications specialist has one. You'll see what this says is overhead allocations. So real briefly, administration, finance, pretty much exists to handle the business of the enterprise funds. We do have the police department, obviously, in the gate. Those are outside, but the water department, as an example, does not have its own accounting. It doesn't have its own billing. It doesn't have its own HR or management positions. Neither does wastewater, neither does solid waste or roads. So our costs at administration get shared on an allocation formula. That's a part of our budget. We've been hopefully more transparent to inform the community that those costs exist. And we've changed the accounting to be from a direct charge to a indirect allocation here. So we picked up another 78,000. All told, this is over $200,000 in costs, which, if we go back here, is a significant chunk of the increase from 15 to 20. Here's salaries and benefits, budgeted versus actual. Again, we had envisioned these back before 18. They weren't filled. So that's goal number 1, just operational financial stability. Goal number 2 is repairs and replacements. So as I mentioned, there's not been capital invested into the system for many, many years. And again, we're talking about a 2007 rate that we've been working from, which did not include capital. So these are items that we've identified that we'd like to continue to improve on the site by putting in a paved area, controlling the dust. The manure cover is intended to help save costs. So when the manure is wet, we can only dump about half of our normal dry load. That results in more bins. If we can keep it drier, then we can hopefully avoid some of the more unnecessary hauls. And as I showed you earlier, we're in the $200 per haul rate for the bins. RFID gate, this is our identifier for at the point where we now have amenity cards for residents to use to access the front gate through the visitor lane. As a resident, they choose not to have an RFID and want to go through the lane with the gatehouse. We are in the process of updating that to have association provided cards with an RFID that improves the security by replacing the windshield stickers or older amenity cards that are held by people who have since left or moved and really aren't entitled to enter, but we can't deny based on the cards. With the new system, we can turn off access to the gate and to entry to people who have since moved and are no longer entitled to be coming in through that gate, unless they get a permit or a pass from a resident somewhere. So that's first year. Second year, here's another one that we envision to help save money long term. If we have a wood chipper, we can put more volume into a bin than if we just dump it as green waste. So we've seen in the past where we can haul one bin of chipped wood green waste versus 7 to 10 larger bins because it's not been chipped, and so just the volume of the material in there. Second part of paving and a second gate. So we envision being able to have separate entrances for green waste and the household waste. For that first year, probably we're just going to have one entry coming in. Here's where the equipment gets replaced. So you'll see the backhoe, which we use to compact the household waste, and the loader, which we use to load the green waste or the manure, are, let's see, 15 and 14 years old. Part of the challenge we have is that they're not compliant with air quality regulations any longer. And so we've got to get our equipment fleet up to the appropriate tier level for air quality requirements as an entity. Block wall, this just recognizes the block wall around the green waste and manure is getting old and falling apart. This is a part of normal repair and replacement for an operation. And then lastly, a recycling cover. So what we envision here is that as we evolve and improve on our recycling, we can put a cover over it, keep particularly the cardboard dry, but all of the recycled materials dry. And in so doing, they'll have a better resale value, cardboard for sure, than if it's wet. So we can envision using larger canisters, bins for collecting the different types of recyclables, and then we want to keep them dry for subsequent sale. Well, here's the flat line that I was mentioning. So let's see, from 09 to 18, there were literally $0 spent on capital. This comes out of our financials. even though they had budgeted along the way for some, you'll see. And let's see, I came somewhere around in here for the last several years. We were looking to do it. We finally did do it. And by that, I mean the transfer station reconfiguration. Our third goal is to have our 20% of operating costs in reserve. We have a policy at the district that all of these various funds, whether it's a general fund or the water, wastewater, roads, or solid waste, have a minimum reserve fund. That is essentially our rainy day fund. It's a contingency. We have it there in the case of some emergent need. Something has happened. We have to buy something, pay for something, do something. And so that is a policy. We've been failing in most of our enterprise accounts. This has been a consistent goal in all of our adjustment approaches. What we have done in both the water, wastewater, and now in this one is to recognize, early on, we cover our operating costs, we cover our capital so we can get those things done. And then over time, his 21, 2, 3, over time, by the end of the 5-year rate period, we will again be compliant with that policy. So it becomes kind of the last goal we try to achieve during the 5-year period of the rate adjustment. This is a look at if we don't have an adjustment. This is with rate adjustments, without rate adjustments. We're essentially going to be running out of funds, and it only gets worse. One of the questions that was asked of me at a prior outreach, what do we do? What if it doesn't pass? If we don't get the adjustment? I think that becomes a matter of having to change what we do. It could be our hours of operation, where we have to have staff available. It could be that we eliminate some of the service, and I pick on green waste and manure as an example, where if we did not provide those, we could have some savings on tipping costs, if you will, the hauling, the getting that to the landfill. And we may be able to then close the gap that we had earlier. I believe it was about 285, most recent budget. So we could close that gap, but that's kind of how you'd have to do it if we didn't have a rate adjustment. So here's what the rates have been historically back 03, 4, 5, 6, and then this is where we're at today. Since 2007, what we're proposing and recommending is getting up to 26 and then having a couple smaller increases, and then the rate can stay the same. We can kind of show some of that. Conclusion: revenues must increase to cover needs. We need to fund the repairs. We need to meet the reserves. Now here's where the number comes in. This may look familiar to residents again, because this is similar modeling that we've used for our other rate adjustments. So you'll see we have the increase, or the rate here. By the way, the study recognizes about 5 new homes per year. We may have averaged 7 over the last few years. This is just a little bit more conservative, doesn't make a huge difference. It's not like we're having hundreds of new homes built. Let's see, here's a percentage rate increase, but here's our final revenues. Here's our expenses. So you can see we begin to just barely in the next year or so cover that. And here's the important part of our modeling approach. So once we've identified what the net surplus is, if you will, from operations. These transfer outs recognize some shared kind of capital. As an example, this $17,000 number is from a share of a new fuel system. So we don't have 4 or 5 different fuel systems for each enterprise. We have one, and they share costs. And this envisions that there will be similar type projects in the future. So we have our beginning fund balance. You'll see it's really low here. We begin to add to it 34 to 34, 129, 129. And then we subtract out that planned capital that I showed you, and we end up with ending fund balance. The important number for us becomes these two, the 20% of the budget for those future years, and whether or not we will have a fund balance in excess of that. And what we want to have out there at 5 years is to have a positive number relative to the reserve, and to hopefully have that be on the incline. If you go here and you look at these 3 numbers, it'll be kind of on the decline. There's basically $20,000 a year. Our costs go up $20,000 a year. So the revenues out there are kind of flat. We'd indicated no increases in the 4th and 5th year. So, we're in the plus. At that point, the district can reassess and look at the rates and see what they'd like to do about it. There certainly is a little capacity for other capital, which actually might be needed as we move forward on looking at the stormwater management. So here is the preliminary schedule. The board already, and we called it preliminary final draft, pending input from people and any appropriate changes. We bring it back to the board on the 10th as a final draft. At that point, they would finalize it and set the hearing, mail the notices. July 29th would be a special board meeting for this item, potentially other business, as long as we're having a meeting. And then the rates would go into effect August 1st.